The US claimed they wanted to stop the spread of communism in Vietnam, yet all they have done was committing war crimes. Babies, children, women, men, and old people were being brutally beaten, assaulted, and killed by those freedom-obsessed people. But many who committed these acts genuinely believed they were the heroes of the story, that they were bringing freedom and happiness to the people. Well then, today we're gonna take a peek at their heroic action in Vietnam to see if they were the hero or the devil. Burn all, destroy all, kill all policy. During the war in Vietnam, the world hero, USA, had a policy that can be summarized as burn all, destroy all, kill all, which was a systematic campaign of terror and annihilation carried out by US troops against the Vietnamese population. Multiple US veterans later testified that this policy included shooting down Vietnamese civilians for sport, burning their entire villages to the ground, slaughtering their livestock, destroying their rice fields, mutilating their bodies, and carrying out the wide-scale rape of women. All of these atrocities aimed to wipe out all material and human foundations of resistance, treating entire communities as enemies and deliberately turning large areas of South Vietnam into wastelands through fire, explosives, and chemical defoliants. An anonymous GI wrote a letter to Army Chief of Staff William Westmoreland claiming to have witnessed hundreds of acts of terrorism by US soldiers during Operation Speedy Express. The GI recalled that there was random shooting from helicopters at anything that moved on the ground, and that the snipers were the worst killers, who were responsible for at least 600 murders per month. The US were obsessed with body count, so to them, Vietnam was their hunting ground to impress their bosses. And to the Vietnamese people, every day was a My Lai massacre. According to the October 10, 1966 issue of the New York Herald Tribune, the quantity of bombs dropped on Vietnam in 1965 amounted to 480,000 tons. In April 1966, McNamara, U.S. Defense Secretary, reported to the U.S. Congress that the quantity of bombs dropped on Vietnam that year would run to 638,000 tons, greater than the total released on the whole Pacific area in World War II. These amount of bomb was enough to show the atrocious nature of the war and the U.S. government's deliberate scheme to massacre the Vietnamese people. Wherever the U.S. aggressors go, there is mourning and destruction. They have been carrying out the burn all, destroy all, kill all policy all over South Vietnam, which was why the South needed to fight back. The North was helping the South Resistance Force a lot around this time too, cause bro, they were all literally Vietnamese, and they wanted to be united and kick US's ass out of their country. But funny how the US twisted it into the North invaded the South, and many people still believe it till this day. How the US and its puppet regime treated Vietnamese prisoners. To hide their aggressive colonialist nature, the U.S. carefully maintained the facade of an independent Saigon government, a puppet regime they controlled from behind the scenes, and at the same time applied the most perfidious policy of using Vietnamese to kill Vietnamese. When it comes to torturing revolutionary prisoners, some U.S. soldiers in the Saigon puppet regime had proven that they were as disgusting as the Nazis. To them, Viet Cong were a dangerous threat, a bloodlust creature, when in fact they were just civilians whose freedom were being taken away by savage Westerners and its henchmen. They refused to become slaves for the invader, so they rose up and fought back. But to the invader, this resistance is unacceptable. So they told the world that the resistance forces were the bad guys that needed to be killed and tortured in the most brutal way possible. Phu Quoc Prison was the largest detention camp operated by the U.S. Saigon regime in South Vietnam, where approximately 40,000 prisoners who were revolutionary fighters and patriotic civilians were held. In here, prisoners were punished by being forced to lie on tin sheet racks under the scorching sun, where the metal heated like a roasting pan. If they dared to move, the guards would swing batons straight down onto their heads or were ready to shoot them on the spot. Others were forced to climb up thorn-covered neem trees and then slide back down. After only a few attempts, the thighs, chest, arms, and legs would be smeared with blood. Prisoners were also made to eat rice mixed with sand and urine. If they refused to eat, they would get beaten. If they vomited while eating, they would also get beaten and forced to gather their vomit up and continue eating. The guard used clubs to smash the prisoners' toes and fingers. Some particularly sick individuals even pried out prisoners' teeth to keep as a collection for amusement. They also used knives to slit prisoners' private part, inserted leeches into the wounds, and then stitched them back up. Even more brutal was the punishment in the so-called tiger cages. The tiger cage model was reconstructed on the site of the original cages, surrounded by layers of barbed wire fencing, guard posts, and high-intensity lights. Each cage was a barbed wire enclosure, too low for a prisoner to sit upright and too short to stretch out one's legs, making it impossible to move. After each session of torture, many prisoners were confined there day after day, regardless of sun or rain, deprived of food and water. Any movement would cause the body to be pierced by sharp barbed wire points, like countless needles stabbing into the flesh. Tiger Force. Tiger Force was an elite reconnaissance and special operations unit of the U.S. Army. Deployed to Vietnam between 1967 and 1968, Tiger Force became responsible for systematic war crimes against Vietnamese civilians, documented by U.S. investigators and journalists decades later. According to Vietnamese historical sources and corroborated by U.S. veteran testimony, Tiger Force soldiers regularly tortured and executed prisoners rather than detaining them. Civilians suspected, often without evidence, of supporting resistance forces were beaten, interrogated under torture, and killed. These executions were not battlefield incidents, but deliberate killings of detainees, constituting clear violations of the Geneva Conventions. The unit also frequently and intentionally murdered Vietnamese civilians, including men, women, children, and the elderly. U.S. soldiers operated under an assumption that any Vietnamese person could be an enemy, a mindset encouraged by U.S. counterinsurgency doctrine and body count incentives. Civilians killed in this way were routinely recorded as enemy dead. One of the most documented and disturbing aspects of Tiger Force's crimes was systematic mutilation of victims. Soldiers cut off ears from corpses and living victims, collecting them as trophies. These ears were sometimes strung together and worn as necklaces, symbolizing domination and dehumanization of the Vietnamese people. In addition, Tiger Force members were reported to have scalped victims and kept pieces of skin, practices that echoed colonial-era and genocidal violence rather than lawful military conduct. Sexual violence was also part of Tiger Force's criminal behavior. One documented incident describes a young Vietnamese mother who was drugged, sexually assaulted, and then murdered by U.S. soldiers. Such acts were not isolated, but occurred within a broader environment of impunity where Vietnamese women were treated as expendable and unprotected. Another particularly brutal case recounts the killing of a small child whose mother had already been murdered. After killing the child, a Tiger Force soldier cut off the child's head, an act that underscores the extreme level of dehumanization and moral collapse within the unit. These acts were not punished at the time and were known to other soldiers, indicating tolerance or silent approval within the command structure. Tiger Force operations also involve the destruction of villages, homes, food supplies, and livestock, leaving survivors displaced and starving. These actions aligned with U.S. search and destroy missions in free fire zone policies, which removed legal protections for civilians and normalized indiscriminate violence. In Vietnamese historical memory, Tiger Force's actions are understood as part of a broader burn all, destroy all, kill all approach carried out during the U.S. invasion. Crucially, the U.S. Army did investigate Tiger Force between 1971 and 1975.
The investigation gathered testimony from dozens of American soldiers and Vietnamese witnesses and confirmed many allegations, including murder and brutality. However, no one was ever court-martialed. The investigation was quietly closed, and its findings were buried for decades. This failure to prosecute reflects a broader pattern of institutional impunity within the U.S. military during the Vietnam War.
In conclusion, the U.S. government was and still is the enemy of humanity. They brainwashed their soldiers to take part in a war that had nothing to do with protecting the U.S.'s national security. They massacred Vietnamese civilians, claiming everyone was communist with no proof and no understanding of what communist is and why Vietnamese need communism to get rid of invaders. Now the U.S. government still meddling with other countries and intervene in their politics, but at least Americans are now realizing their government is the bad guy in every story. Do you know any unknown war crime of the U.S. government? Drop it in the comment below, and if you like these kind of video, hit that like button and subscribe. See you in the next episode.